Hey, everybody, welcome to That Expert Show, where you help run the show. I'm Anna Canzano. Thanks so much for joining us today. We've got a great episode lined up for you. Today, we're talking about breaking toxic patterns, either in your life or maybe the lives of your family and friends. Do you have that friend who just consistently makes the same kind of mistake over and over again in the type of relationship that they're engaging in? Or are you yourself, finding yourself that you keep doing the same unhealthy things or engaging in the same unhealthy behavior? We've got a great expert lined up today, a licensed clinical psychologist. She's a professional keynote speaker as well, and a mind, body, soul transformation coach. She's been seen on various news outlets throughout Southern California as a mental health expert, and she joins us live right now from San Diego, Dr. Amber Salvador. Dr. Salvador, thank you so much for being with us.
I'm so happy to be here. Good morning, Anna.
Good morning. Part of the mission of this show is to help people live longer and healthier and happier lives, and this really fits into that mission. We posted some of these questions, this topic, on various social media accounts, and people are chiming in with their questions. For example, let's see, Rob, this is more of a comment than a question, but he was talking about how people seem to be in such a hurry to find the next relationship and find their security blanket, and people should be patient. Do you find this to be true of the people that you encounter in your practice?
Yes, I think this is culturally influenced, that we're basically taught to go to school, get a degree, start dating, get married, have kids, buy a house, right? This is the trajectory that's laid out for us. And as a society, that's what we're informed is the quote unquote right thing to do. And so I believe what happens is there's this perception, there's this message that we all receive, especially in Western society, that we need to be coupled up in order to be good enough, in order to kind of meet the status quo. And so there is what I've seen, and a lot of people experience, a rush or a pressure to be in a couple, to get married. And unfortunately, and I think what Rob was talking about, is there's such a pressure. You see teenagers, you see young 20-somethings already wanting to get married. And that's not a judgment, about that. However, we know our frontal lobe isn't even developed until we're past 21. So making decisions, planning, organization, all these key components of learning how to function as an adult aren't even developed until after we're 21. Yet there's a pressure to get married, to be whole, to be happy. And that's a grave misconception that I think leads to a lot of people eventually divorcing, having constant conflict in relationships because other parts of themselves haven't been developed enough before they go into a partnership that's intended to last a lifetime.
What I think is interesting too is, people who are making the same mistakes over and over again and choosing partners that are unhealthy or maybe sabotaging relationships that were fine and dandy, but they started to do things that sabotage the relationship. How much does your family of origin play into that? Like, as far as whether your parents had a healthy relationship and kind of what you saw modeled for you growing up?
That's a great question. This is a combination of nature and nurture. So essentially, genetically, genes are passed down from generation to generation, which does have an influence on things like emotion regulation. And what I mean by that is how you manage your emotions. And that is the foundation of things like communication and motivation and what career you choose and what partnership you go for. How you handle your emotions completely affects all the choices that you make. Are you impulsive? Are you someone who needs instant gratification? Also, though, it's environmental. So what you observe from your parents, we learn, and we either take in information and we say, oh, I want to do that. My parents were really good at this. That felt good for me. Or we look at our parents and say, like, I want to do it differently, right? However, the problem is we can say consciously, I don't want to do that, but we've been programmed through the nature and nurture components to where we start believing certain aspects of things about ourselves, and then it becomes part of our unconscious, which means we're not aware of it. And then it influences and dictates our behavior as adults. So to answer your question, absolutely. Family of origin, I want you to think of it, it's like a template for how you do life as an adult. And if you don't become aware of that template and actively seek to change the parts of it that don't serve you, then you will just reenact and replay generational trauma, maladaptive behaviors, and even the good stuff too. You'll just kind of reenact all of it.
Maladaptive behaviors. What would you describe as maladaptive behaviors? It's a fancy term.
Yeah. So that's kind of these toxic patterns that we're talking about. It's anything like binge eating, drinking every night to relax, smoking, using illicit substances, gambling, using sex to soothe yourself, any form of addiction, getting on social media for hours and hours and hours. It's honestly anything that we do so much that it's taking up a bunch of our time, and it's also affecting our lives in some sort of problematic way. It might not seem like a big deal initially, but over time it has a cumulative effect. So for example, if every night I ate 2 cookies, initially that might not be a big deal, but over time, if you keep eating 2 cookies every night, that could add a cumulative effect, and suddenly you have an extra 15 pounds and you feel sluggish and lethargic. So the idea is that it's something that you're doing that's creating some sort of consequence for yourself, either emotional, physical, spiritual, cognitive, etc.
Interesting. And so what I think you said that was particularly intriguing here is that if you're not aware of your family of origin issues and how they might be affecting your relationships, then you really have a lot of work to do. Like you're fighting an uphill battle against your own tendencies that might be unhealthy. For example, if you came from a family that was divorced, like your inclination, if your relationship is going south, whether you're married or not, might be to like bail out sooner than the, person who came from a family where all they saw were parents and grandparents who stuck together through the thick and thin.
Mm-hmm. It could be that way, right? There's a resiliency factor involved where there's certain folks who are born into families where they see, let's use divorce, for example. They see that, so that becomes the template for how they understand relationships. And if we're not conscious of it, meaning if we're not aware, we could very easily slip into relationships and reenact patterns that our parents reenacted unknowingly, which could lead to divorce. However, there are certain folks that I come into contact with who have this awareness and they recognize, I don't want to do it that way. And it can go one of 2 ways. They can know it and they still end up falling into it, but then that becomes the learning lesson where they make changes. Or they can know it, so they actively seek help. They actively work on healing themselves, healing those patterns so that they do it differently. So there's a lot of different options, but yes, our background is a template, but it doesn't have to dictate our present and our future. That's the great news, is that we can become more present and aware of what we're doing so that we can change these patterns to live a life that we desire and we create.
Somebody who wrote in via Facebook had a question about a guy friend that she says somehow attracts all the crazy. He's been engaged like 5 times in the last few years, never works out. He jumps in full blast. He moves, the partner into the house, helps him set up a business, obviously makes a financial investment into these situations. And now the latest girlfriend just went with him on a golf trip to Nevada. She says she just doesn't get it. Why can't he attract a nice, stable girlfriend?
Yeah, and this is common for a lot of people in that they'll say, I have a bad picker, right? I mean, how many people can relate to that, where you consistently attract certain types of people into your life, and then it has this pattern of ending a specific way or going a certain way. What we have to understand, and it's deeper, is that we attract what's going on within us. So what that really means is if there's a part of us that is emotionally closed off or emotionally unavailable, we will then attract emotionally unavailable partners because we ourselves haven't done the work or haven't felt permission or free to open our hearts because we've been hurt, abused, neglected, trauma, you name it. So when it lives within us, we often will attract it to us. So for example, this guy, he's attracting unstable partners. Well, sometimes there's a yin and a yang where someone who's pretty stable will end up attracting an unstable partner, but it's because somewhere within them there's potentially an emotional instability, or there's things that have been unresolved emotionally that continue to draw in this partner. So you might ask, why, Anna? Why do we continue to draw in this partner? It's because the actual purpose of partnership is growth. You will draw to you the exact person that you need to grow you, meaning they're going to trigger you. They're going to trigger up all your stuff. Have you ever noticed that no one can quite trigger you like your partner or like your parent or like your child? It's because there's parts of you that are within them and parts of them that are within you. There's similarities. So you've drawn that person to you so you guys will be triggered, and the idea is that you will respond differently and there will be growth. Unfortunately, though, a lot of people end up just splitting up because they don't have the skills to handle the intensity of the triggers.
So what would be your suggestion then in terms of somebody who is listening to this right now and wants to take an assessment of where they're at with their mental and emotional health, and to look at their family of origin issues and see and map out how those might be playing into the decisions that they're making today? If they wanted to do that, obviously, if they wanted to seek professional help and do that work with a therapist, that would be ideal. But for someone who wants to get started right now and wants to sit down with a pen and paper and start to map things out for themselves, what would you recommend?
That's a great question. Well, so first of all, you have to understand why you're doing this, because that's going to help you to understand how to change it. So when we're engaging in toxic patterns, toxic behaviors, essentially it's a form of coping. So an emotion comes up. It could be loneliness, it could be emptiness, it could be sadness, grief over losing someone in your life, losing a job. It could be anger, universally a very challenging emotion that I've found that people have difficulty with just acknowledging and feeling anger in a healthy way. So let's say an emotion comes up, that usually triggers the response where people will go and do the behaviors such as eating, drinking, using substances, watching TV, zoning out on social media, whatever the behavior is. And the function of that is to escape, to avoid, to numb out, to not deal with whatever emotion came up that the person doesn't want to sit with. So you asked, how can someone start to recognize this and start working on it today? Well, I want you to think of we all have the ability to be detectives of our internal worlds. You have a mind, you have a heart, you have a soul. And it's not something that you can see, right? You can see your heart, but hopefully you haven't recently. These are parts of you that you don't tangibly have access to. So it requires taking the microscope and turning it inward like a detective and starting to become aware. What am I thinking? What am I feeling? What does this feel like in my body? So for example, fear, when it comes in your body, your heart's going to start to race, your muscles are going to constrict, you're going to feel tense, you might have shallow breathing, you might get cold or get hot. All of this is a sign that an uncomfortable emotion has come up, and you want to start to track that. You want to start to pay attention, because then you're going to have the urge to go for that chocolate cake. Or you're going to have the urge to text that person so you can meet up, right? It's pay attention to what's happening for you. And this is the hard part, Anna. is the idea of, instead of going towards that behavior that would normally help you to avoid, numb out, soothe, you sit with the uncomfortable feeling and you breathe through it. And of course, if we had a bunch of time, I could teach you skills on how to move through the emotion, but you be with the feeling, because that feeling's actually trying to communicate something to you. And that deeper issue is what we actually want to resolve, so that you don't feel like you need to keep going to the fridge or getting on social media or zoning out with TV. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. It does make sense.
So you sit with it, you feel it, and then the idea is you do something healthy, a healthy coping mechanism to work through the emotion. And that could be simple for your listeners, such as writing things out. Writing is a very cathartic tool. It could be singing. It could be going for a walk and breathing. It could be working out. And for people who are more triggered, like it's more intense, writing's actually not good. You might want to go to the freezer and put ice on your face. Putting ice right here, it's called the dive reflex. Your brain is here. And so when you put that cold here, it's like, have you ever gotten into a cold pool or the water turned cold in the shower? And you're like, right? Well, try to think about anything meaningful when you're in that mode, when you're freezing. You won't. It zaps everything away, because you've now put the brain into that freeze, and you will start to kick in your parasympathetic, which is part of your nervous system, which is rest and digest, and then it will calm you down. So there's all sorts of tricks of the trade to help you to move through emotions instead of going towards toxic behaviors.
Interesting. We had another question when it comes to relationships. This one's on Twitter, I think. Mike wrote in and said, "It feels impossible to find someone who is equally yoked in my Christian faith. What is the key to a lasting relationship?"
Oh my goodness. Well, lasting relationships, I think, are truly, there's some fundamentals. One is, and kind of like Mike's saying, one is definitely based on values. You know, they say opposites attract. And that's okay when it comes to activities, let's say, or music, even though that can be a hard one sometimes. You know, day-to-day stuff, right? It's okay to have separate interests. It's really cool if you have similar interests. But I think for a long-term relationship, what's really key is values. Meaning, do we have the same values when it comes to raising the children if you decide to have a child? Do we have the same faith-based values? You know, couples can make it if they don't have the same religious or faith-based values. However, it makes it more challenging, and how wonderful to share in the same faith with your partner because you're speaking the same language. Do you both believe in fidelity? Do you both believe in honesty? These are values. Do you believe in communication and compassion? Those are important conversations to have before you enter into the union of marriage, which surprisingly so many people don't. You know, you've heard the cliche that people spend a year planning the wedding and they don't plan the marriage. So the first step is really your values. And when you get really clear on your values, and then here's the key, you live your values, like you actually practice them, you're going to energetically be sending out and attracting a partner, because you're actually living it. You're going to be attracting a partner who potentially could also have the same faith-based values. Another really important and critical one is communication. And something I teach and am big on is emotional mastery. And emotional mastery is the foundation of effective communication. We communicate in all sorts of ways, verbally, what we say, but non-verbally, with our eyes, with our tone, with our face, with our body posture. And we are constantly sending signals to our partner or to a prospective partner. And so we have to get really clear about, what does effective communication look like? Meaning being direct and honest and vulnerable, versus ineffective, which is hiding, not sharing, or lashing out, or not telling you what I feel, but showing you what I feel, like slamming the door. There's all sorts of ways that we communicate that aren't effective. So I'd say the two biggest things: values, and communication. And the more you actually live that practice, and then lastly, have an open heart, that's a big one. Many people want love, but their heart's not open. They're kind of jaded, frankly. And so your heart is open when you're in love with yourself, you're in love with the opportunity to meet somebody else, and you're just open to the possibilities before you. If you're closed, if you're not loving yourself, if you're not caring for you, if you're jaded about people, even though you think you want love, you might be closed off to it. So that's something really important to think about.
That totally makes sense. I read a lot about teenagers, especially, and young people right now. And I would love to know what you think about anxiety levels, because all the studies show that there's an issue in our society with anxiety, increasing levels of anxiety. And I wonder sometimes, is this just that more people are talking about it and the stigma around it is going down? Or do you think that as a culture, we're becoming a more anxious culture?
I can't speak to whether we're becoming a more anxious culture. I do think with the advent of social media, especially with our younger generations, I could see, and I don't have research in this moment to back it up, but as an opinion, I could see how younger folks have increased anxiety because of the way that there's so much exposure online and pressure online to create an image and to get likes and follows and attention. And so I think that's added an increase of pressure that previous generations did not have, and an increase of bullying, an increase of comparisons. However, I think anxiety, it's been around forever. It's a flight or fight emotion. So the function of anxiety is it's to warn us that there's danger, right? Anxiety is really just fear. And fear is trying to tell us there's danger, caution, caution. However, because of our basic needs, for the most part, for a lot of people, are met, not everybody. Now the danger becomes what mom and dad said, or what your partner said, or what your boss did, or the look your friend gave you. Danger has become different for us now, but still very prevalent. And so people will notice a spike of anxiety when they feel disconnected in relationships, when they feel lonely. And there's, biological correlates of anxiety as well. So there's lots and lots of reasons. But one thing I want to say really quick about it is that anxiety is a symptom. It's a signal that something's amiss, something's going on. And oftentimes we try to numb the anxiety, we try to get rid of it, And what I'd encourage people to do is to say, well, why is it here? Because typically it's laying over the top of some unresolved issues, unresolved trauma, anger that we're holding in, feelings of grief that we haven't dealt with. And over time, when you have emotions that haven't been dealt with, they stack and stack and stack, and it becomes like a volcano, and we can only hold so much until we, right? And anxiety can sometimes be what it looks like in like the form of a panic attack or intense anxiety, or for other people, it'll look like an outburst or aggression, because basically we have all these unresolved emotions that haven't been dealt with. And so now we have an overflow, which is what the anxiety is signaling, essentially.
Interesting. When it comes to, having better, habits, when it comes to eating, meditation, or yoga, what ideas do you have around just a healthier way to live?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this can relate to the anxiety piece as well, is that, healthy habits are an extension of taking care of ourselves. And we can do that from a space of either self-love, or we can do it from a space of self-loathing. And what I mean by that is a lot of people do healthy habits. They drink their green juice, they go to the gym, they do things that appear healthy, but they're doing it from a place of, I should be doing this. If I'm not doing this, it means X, Y, and Z about me, and there's pressure and there's force. So I want you first to recognize, are you doing these healthy habits from a place of self-love or self-loathing? If there's force, if there's pressure, it might be a little self-loathing. The key is to embody healthy habits because we deserve it, because we are worth it. We love ourselves. And this, in essence, is going to reduce your anxiety because you're going to be coming from a place of, I value this body. I value this mind. I want to take care of myself. It matters to me. So that could look as simple as increasing your water intake. Because we all know that we need to be drinking more water. It could look like making your bed in the morning. It could look like getting, it's recommended 15 minutes of meditation in the morning, 15 minutes in the night. Meditation is the space where you get to disconnect from this freeway of chatter. We have over 60,000 thoughts in our mind a day. It's a freeway of chatter. So meditation is the practice of recognizing how scattered our minds are. And over time, we can become centered on the moment so that we can release our attachments to all the chatter, which is like, when you get there, it's phenomenal. Right? And obviously moving our body. And people will always ask me, what's the best form of exercise? And I say, whatever you like.
Yeah.
That's the best form.
Right.
Don't make yourself try and go to the gym if that's not you. I was going to say we live in San Diego, but I live in San Diego. There's beautiful places everywhere, but there's beautiful places where you are too. Get outside, do something that feels good for your soul. That's a healthy habit.
We're almost out of time, but just real quick, another question we wanted to answer from Instagram. What types of mental health professionals are there? Are they all the same or are they different?
Right. That's a great question. So my credentials are a Psy.D, so I'm a doctorate. There's Psy.Ds and there's PhDs. And so there's doctorate level psychologists, then there's LMFTs. I'm giving you the credentials just because you'll see them like that online. That's licensed marriage and family therapists. There's social workers, there's school counselors. The basic difference is the amount of schooling that folks have had. The training, the hours that they've had working live with clients, and then specialties. So, licensed marriage family therapists, they might do a lot of couple work, but they can also do individuals as well. Psychologists, the difference there is psychologists can do psychological testing. They can also do couples therapy. Social workers can do therapy also. However, their specialty, I would say, could be case management. So getting someone resources who needs resources of any kind, be it food or shelter, et cetera. So when you're looking, I would just say psychologytoday.com is a great resource. It's in most people's areas for looking at what type of professional, do they take insurance that you need? What do they specialize in?
Got it. That's a great resource. And we will include that in the tip sheet that we create from this show. Dr. Salvador, thank you so much for being a guest on our show and for enlightening us today. I learned a lot. I hope our viewers did as well.
Yeah, awesome. It was great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks. And thank you at home for being part of this show today. Loved your input, loved all the questions that you posed to us, and let us know if you have more questions. We'd be happy to answer them after the fact as well. You can also connect with us on social media. I'm on Facebook at Anna Canzano, on Twitter and Instagram at That Expert Show. Watch or listen to the show after the fact on our YouTube channel, That Expert Show, as well as a podcast. You can take us in that way on Apple iTunes, Google Play, TuneIn, Stitcher, Spotify, all those great places. And you can check out previous episodes on our website, thatexpertshow.com. Thanks again for being part of this show. You are what makes it work because it is called That Expert Show, where you help run the show.